I was already a big fan of the show. So I was like, oh my gosh, I hope this doesn't ruin it for me seeing how the sausage is made. And it made me love it even more. There's so much little tricks that you can do just by affecting how the sound works. And why is this door slamming funnier than this one?
I ask a very specific question. What makes one door slam funnier than another?
I was so lucky that I got to work on season 6 of Big Mouth and season 1 of Human Resources, the spinoff. And I had never really done anything with animation. So that was my first kind of insight into it. And I was actually doing almost at the beginning of the process, I was doing the first radio play. So I would like sit in on the recordings with the different actors and then basically make a podcast version of the episode that then the animators would edit to. So it was so cool to be have to work within the constraints of only using music, sound effects, and dialogue to tell a story and make sure that it was still working and reading. We just have like text cards on screen of like, here's what will go here. And so it really made me appreciate even more like sound design. And you can get so specific with the different parts of the takes you're using, because obviously if you're not seeing picture, you can say, okay, let's take the beginning of this take, the breath from this one, and then this from the like dialogue library, they have this laugh from Nick Kroll that works really well for this moment. So it was so much more. You could really like finesse and dial in the performance in a way that has affected how I edit for picture now too, because there's so much like little tricks that you can do just by affecting how the sound works. And why is this door slamming funnier than this one? Or like, how does this end up shaping the performance just by using a slightly different like pacing to this. So anyway, it was so cool to be at the beginning of the process. And then obviously from there, once we had the radio play locked, they do like an animatic, then they do black and white animation, then they go into color animation. I wasn't actually ever cutting to picture when I was on these shows, but it was really cool to be able to like check in and be like, oh my gosh, like they added a couple more frames here that lets the joke breathe so much more. And there really is so much thought behind, you basically have your shots like you would in live action, only they're animated with, a certain amount of handles and just making sure everything lands as perfectly as possible. So, that team is all so talented and so kind. They're such a well-oiled machine. And I was already a big fan of the show. So I was like, oh my gosh, I hope this doesn't, ruin it for me seeing how the sausage is made. And it made me love it even more because everyone's just so talented and good at what they do.
Can I ask a very specific question? What makes one door slam funnier than another? I'm sure you've got it. That's a great observation, but like, what's funny?
Yeah.
I'm
We had
asking.
so many conversations of like, okay, would Jay's door be really creaky? Would it be funnier if it's like really fast? Would it be great if it's like, you hear the effort of like, ugh, but then it's like a really small, like, like smash.
Mhm.
So it kind of depends on like, in these really comedic, shows, you kind of want to end every scene with a laugh, ideally. So sometimes if there wasn't like a really strong written joke, it was like, okay, what can we do with the sound effects to make it feel a little bit more like punctuated or a little bit like, okay, before we switch locations, like, is there a little something that can just be like a chuckle before we switch to something else? And the cool thing about animation too is you can kind of constantly rewrite it. So that's why I think Big Mouth is so tight and so funny, is because, if you were film something in live action and you're like, oh, we'd have to do a reshoot to get this joke again. Like, you're obviously not going to do that. That's going to be really expensive. But if they're like, we have John Mulaney in the booth again next week for the next, episode, let's just get him to make a joke about the Eagles winning the Super Bowl. That's going to be way more relevant, even though we've been working on this for 5 months. It's really cool how they can update that. And I think that's what makes it feel so fresh, even though it takes, like 2 years to make a season of the show. It really feels relevant because they can constantly kind of punch it up and make sure that it still, is going to hit and all the jokes will still land.